Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Droppin Knowledge with Noah. Today, we are going to dive deep into the most recent Cox Automotive Buyer's Journey Survey report and go a little bit deeper into their finance version of it. So every year, Cox Automotive, we survey, a couple thousand different buyers. We ask them how long it took them to buy a car. Did they like it? What did they pay? Was the experience better than it was before? All sorts of questions. And then we also look at how they finance their vehicle and get some really good information there. So really what I'm going to do here is pull out a couple of the key points that I found from the reports and go over kind of an action plan for you as a dealership to take advantage of these latest stats. Now, if you want to dive deep into the actual reports themselves, I've got the links for them in the description of this video. You can click on that, you can download them, you can nerd out, get all the stats that you want as you see fit. So let's jump right into it and talk about what we found in this report. So number one, we're going to go into customer satisfaction trends. So right out of the gate, new car buyer satisfaction was at an all-time high at 75%. And satisfaction with the overall dealership experience was 81%. Now, we also found that 42% of new buyers said that the process was better than their last purchase. But we also found that the time it took to buy a car was longer than ever, right? Well, very close to it. 13 and a half hours for new buyers, 14 and a half hours for used buyers. Now, that's not all in the store. That's basically the entire process, from research, getting your trade-in value on KBB, checking out some vehicles on a dealership website, figuring out your payment, filling out a lead, talking to a salesperson, in-store experience, etc. But really the key takeaway here is people really enjoy the experience more than ever, but they still hate how long it takes. So what we want to be doing is thinking about how can we streamline the process, make it so F&I is faster, streamline the online to in-store experience, make sure that we're not duplicating efforts and really making sure we're taking a lean or continuous improvement, magnifying glass to our sales process to make sure we're providing the best experience for shoppers so they want to keep coming back to us and buy their next car from us and also service all their cars from us and send those vehicles in to trade in with us when it's time to get rid of them. That's what we want to be focusing on. All right, next up, we want to talk about the digital versus in-person experience, that kind of omni-channel experience for our shoppers. Now, one thing that we found that was really interesting was only 11% of new vehicle shoppers intended to buy a vehicle fully in person. They wanted to do more of the process online. But in reality, we saw 51% of shoppers doing exactly that. But we also found that mostly digital shoppers, people who completed more than 50% of the buying process online, were far more satisfied, right? So that was about 79% of them rated it as highly satisfied versus 60% of those light digital buyers. So what do we want to do here? Okay, so it means that maybe our tools are not getting people engaged earlier and they're just thinking, hey, you know what, I'm going to just get into the store, or we're still focusing on just that bring it in methodology of, hey, the best process possible is for you to come in. We're not going to give you pricing before you come into the store, etc. We're kind of hanging on to some old processes and some old ways of doing things. So what we can think about is, all right, for every inbound communication from a shopper inquiring about inventory that we have, you send them a link to a digitized experience. So, right, a link to your digital retailing tool to get them to complete more of those steps online, because we saw that their satisfaction increased dramatically when they were able to complete more of those steps online before they came into the store. Another thing, we're going to highlight some EV buyers stats, right? EV and hybrid, actually. And what we found was they were overall the most highly satisfied buyers, right? EV buyers, 82% of them reported being highly satisfied with the process. And hybrid buyers, 80%. ICE buyers, 75%. But we also found that EV/hybrid buyers are 2 to 3 times more likely to complete financing, test drive scheduling, and contract signing steps online. So they are digitally native buyers, right? They're going after a tech-forward product. They're more familiar with online buying tools. Maybe they bought a Tesla in the past and they're buying a new Toyota EV or a Hyundai EV or a Chevy EV, right? They're looking for those online processes. They're going to take advantage of them. So what we want to do when we're thinking about these EV buyers is build out an EV digital playbook that is for our sellers because they're more tech forward, they're more savvy with the technology. So we can't just say, hey, just come in, right? We want to provide education on the differences between buying an EV and a gas-powered car because there's obviously some big differences there. You plug it in versus fueling it up, and you got to make sure that you got the right charging station, et cetera. We also found that shoppers who are buying EVs or hybrids want more transparent pricing and are much more likely to go after direct financing. So we want to think about that when we're talking to these buyers. Another thing that stuck out from these studies was that sticker shock is fading. We went through a period in the 2020s, I can't believe we're on the other half of the decade, where shoppers were paying more than ever before for vehicles. We saw lots of markups because of inventory shortages, et cetera. We're really kind of out of the woods there when it comes to sticker shock. So in 2023, we saw that 49% of buyers said prices were higher than expected. That was lower than in 2022. And in 2024, that number dropped to 42%. I'm going to say in 2025, that number is going to drop even further because we're seeing some overabundance of inventory for certain manufacturers or having to drop prices. We also found that buyers felt a lot better about inventory selection. So that favorable perception jumped from 34% in 2023 to 42% in 2024. So really what we want to be focusing on is building trust. We want to highlight fair pricing. Right? It is much more competitive. It's much more of a buyer's market for most vehicles. Now, there's definitely going to be your vehicles that are still commanding MSRP or maybe even higher. We're talking about, Toyota Siennas, Highlander hybrids, your niche Porsches, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, people have options. So we got to be competitive with our pricing. We want to be fair with the pricing. And we want to highlight our improved inventory out there and make sure people know, hey, if you're looking for a specific vehicle, more than likely we can get you into exactly what you want. Now let's dive into financing. A lot of really interesting stats when it comes to financing and what's going on with online versus in-store financers, right? So overall satisfaction among finance buyers was 73% for new shoppers, but only 63% for used shoppers. Now, when it comes to online financing and the adoption there, which is really interesting, right? People who go onto your website and fill out a finance application. Some interesting stats, right? 66% of shoppers looked up their credit scores online. So they have a pretty good idea of what their credit score is going to be. 55% of shoppers got a pre-approval online, but only 31% of shoppers applied for credit online. And just 13% of them signed paperwork digitally. So that means that there's kind of a gap here because 53% of shoppers want to calculate payments online, but only 37% of them actually do. But what we found here was that applying online versus in-store, I'm going to highlight this, online versus in-store, those people, when they applied online, their satisfaction with the buying process increased between 14 and 17 points. So they're happier with the buying process. So what that means is they are more likely to come back to buy their next vehicle from you. 14 to 17% lift just by filling out an online credit app. Then let's take a look at some of those buyers, right? So what are the differences between prime buyers and subprime buyers? What do they prefer? Prime buyers, they're looking for a quality rate, right? They're looking for a good rate because, hey, I've got an 800 credit score. I better get a good rate. And ease of use. They want to make sure that buying a car is easy. They don't want to deal with haggling, right? They know they've got a good credit score. They want to get in, get out, and get on with it. Subprime buyers, right? Not much of a surprise here. They're looking for affordable payments. Hey, can you hit my payment and can you get me financed, right? Now, what we also found was that EV/hybrid buyers, they prefer direct financing with banks and credit unions. About 42 to 44% of them prefer that. Well, ICE buyers mostly finance through dealers. So that, I think, is an opportunity, I'm going to highlight it right here, to maybe get some more of those EV buyers to finance through us. And we know that they're more digitally savvy. They're more likely to complete more of those steps online. So we want to highlight maybe the advantages of financing through the dealership, right? Hey, we can meet or beat what the local credit union can offer as far as a financing rate. And we can do it right through us. Or maybe we can finance through the credit union through us. That's what I did when I bought my truck last year. So we want to make sure, hey, these EV buyers, there's an option for you to finance through us, and it gives us that opportunity to get that loan out. Now, let's talk about the action plan. All right, we covered a couple of key stats here, but really, what are the key takeaways? Number one is we still want to focus on cutting that buying time, right? Let's be real. Whoop, I'm going to drop this. Here, let me pick it back up. Buyers, they love their cars, but they hate wasting a whole day at the dealership, right? They don't like spending 5 hours at a dealership buying a car, especially your top tier credit buyers, right? The average buying journey takes about 13 hours. So let's streamline the F&I process, get people to apply for financing online, get them to complete more of those steps online. And that's going to allow you to stand out immediately because you're not focusing on that paperwork shuffle in the dealership and focusing more on making deals. Number two, we want to embrace omnichannel, and that cuts right back to that cutting the buying time, right? Get as many people engaged with digital retailing as possible. And, if you've paid attention to me in the last year, you feel like I've been just saying this over and over again. Well, that's how important it is. If we can get people to complete more of those steps online, they're more likely to buy the car, pay more for the car, and be happier doing it. So they're more likely to service with you and more likely to trade in that vehicle with you and more likely to buy their next vehicle from you. That's how important it is. They're happier with the process. But we found that a lot of shoppers are not doing anything digitally. So what can we do? Well, anytime a shopper reaches out to you about inventory, we have our digital retailing tools, train our people up on sending them links into the digital retailing tool for that vehicle so they can complete more of those steps and, more importantly, apply for financing online. And that immediately bumps up their overall satisfaction with that experience. So big opportunity here. Now, EV buyers, right? They are looking for deals. They're tech savvy. They want to do more of those steps online. We also know most of them are financing through their bank or their credit union. So that's an opportunity to get them to finance through us. We know they're tech savvy. They're more likely to complete those steps online. So we want to encourage them to apply for financing. So highlight the benefits of financing through you. The thing is about EVs, they aren't going away and they aren't going to take over. Not yet, right? It might be, more than a couple of years before EVs are really the majority of vehicles out there. But they are a very important niche in the market, and we still want to sell them appropriately and make sure our people are trained up so that they can be educated and educate the public about them. So we're setting proper expectations. Once again, we're going to push digital financing, right? It applies for if somebody can if somebody can apply for credit online, that satisfaction rate jumps by up to 17 points, and that's massive. So we got to get as many people to apply for financing online, even if they don't want to do digital retailing, right? Maybe they're like, yeah, you know what? I just want to haggle in store. Cool. Let's get your credit application filled up before you come in. Pretty easy. Let's train up our people to get as many people to apply for financing online. And finally, we want to personalize buyer credit tier. Think about our buyers. If we can get that credit application in or that pre-approval in, we know what credit tier they're in. So if we got a prime buyer, right? Top tier credit. We want to make sure we're getting them the best rate and make sure that their process is easy. We could do that by getting them in digital retailing. For our subprime buyer, we want to focus on getting them financed, right? And also hitting their payment. And that might mean switching them to a different vehicle than what they're initially interested in to hit that payment and get them on the road so they can get to their jobs, drive their kids to school, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so that's it. Kind of a speed round for everybody. Hopefully you guys learned something. Once again, if you want to dive deeper into the studies, they are in the description of this video. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. It definitely does help the channel grow. I want to make sure I'm delivering as much value to you guys out there as possible. So stay tuned. I'm going to be coming up with some new episodes very soon with some very special guests. Thanks again.